College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Marc Lehman.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marc Lehman. I am a family therapist from Connecticut and run a private practice up here in the Avon, West Hartford area. Also a second virtual private practice called You Are Heard. Today we will be meeting with Melissa Bernstein. I'm really excited to talk to Melissa today about adolescent mental wellness. Melissa Bernstein, welcome. Very excited to talk to you today. I thought maybe what we could do to kind of kick things off a little bit is just talk a little bit about Melissa and Doug, and then just give us a little background on that. And then also certainly a little background on Lifelines and sort of what that is and what you're currently doing. Be okay if I put you on the hot seat?
No, it's fine. If you want to ask specific questions or you just want me to...
Yeah, I mean, maybe just tell us a little bit about Melissa and Doug, and tell us a little bit about Lifelines and kind of what you're currently doing. I'll throw a little bit of information in about You Are Heard, and I actually do have some questions, so certainly afterwards we'll get into that.
Okay, great. So, and by the way, any questions that people have, just post them, because
Absolutely,
I'll answer anything, and I love questions that I haven't been asked before.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, Doug and I think when we grew up, the conventional path for your livelihood was to go like business or law or medicine. It was very pre-professional. And we both went that path, not because it was what our soul wanted us to do, but because society was like, go that path. Mm-hmm. And he went into advertising and I went into investment banking of all things. And after a very short time, we were both absolutely miserable, especially I. He was more suited for what he did, but I'm a like white space creative who loves words and notes. I don't like numbers, don't do anything for me. So I became really, really disillusioned and sort of fell into, I think, an existential crisis. Like, what am I doing each day? Mm-hmm. And Doug, thank goodness for him, we were dating, and I was probably 21 and he was 23 at the time. And we're like, there has to be something better than this. So we went away for a weekend in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. And we decided we're not leaving until we decide like what can get us out of bed each day. And we decided that we wanted to do something that involved children. So, without him, I never would have had the courage to leave, even though I was so miserable. I actually think I might have stayed there if he hadn't like given me the courage to leave with him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Awesome story. And I guess I'm taking from that, Melissa, for all of the young people that are watching or rewatching this, pay attention to your passion. Really, really important, right?
It's so true. I mean, we were told, don't listen to your passion. Just follow what gives you the like solid, stable career. And when you do that, when you deny your soul, ultimately it's going to sneak up on you and you won't have a choice. Yeah. So I think we were just dating. We weren't in any position. Nobody started companies back then, but we pooled our meager savings and decided to make products for children.
That's awesome. Well, you're very humble. Products for children. Your products are and were amazing. Most people I know, when I mention to them Melissa and Doug, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and they always have a story. I'm sure you've heard millions of them. Of so many amazing things that you guys created, and so many homes that you impacted. With a variety of things that you guys made over the years. Now, how long? This was when, Melissa? Just give me a time frame.
This was in 1988. How
Okay.
crazy is that? Yeah,
That
we
is great.
just celebrated 35 years of Melissa
Wow.
and Doug.
Congratulations. That's
Just
awesome.
crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah. An amazing, amazing accomplishment, amazing business. And like I said, impacting families and children everywhere. And so I'm curious, out of that, you've developed Lifelines. When did Lifelines begin?
It began in 2020. And I
2020.
think, it sort of mirrored my own personal journey because, Melissa and Doug had been the most magical experience ever, but it was no longer an entrepreneurial venture. It was no longer a white space innovative company because we were
Yep.
1,000 people and, it became like a pretty big business.
Yep.
And it was nothing like we didn't know how to do that, and we actually weren't good at doing that, and we didn't really want to operate a big business that was beholden to a lot of different things. But it so happened we still would have stayed there, I'm sure, but it so happened that we knew that there were better people to run the company, and I was also going on my own mental health journey that really led me to sort of develop Lifelines. It wasn't meant to be another company. In fact, the one thing Doug and I said is we will never, and we put never in bold caps and underlined it, we will never start another company. So the fact that we are doing this again and now have like 40 plus people on our team is actually insane. I think we both are insane.
Well, I think it's passion driven. I think it's experience driven. I think, sometimes when you get involved in these things, that's how they develop, right? So let's talk a little bit about what is Lifelines.
Yeah, so Lifelines actually really was my chapter two. My chapter two was that I had been harboring a lot of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
I am a creative, and that came with a very stigmatizing personality that made me hypersensitive in many different areas. And I think my whole life I was really ashamed by those hypersensitivities, because if I was allowed to do what I naturally do, I'd kind of be muttering to myself, like head bent in some corner, because I'm an idea person and I see ideas and words and notes in my head. But I trained myself because I got a message very early on. And I also ponder really dark things. I go very low and have had meaning crises and fall into like a nihilistic tendency, which we can talk about. It's part of my imagination and being able to ponder sort of higher realities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about meaning and deep things like that a lot. So, but I got the message early on that do not show that dark side to the world because nobody wants to hear it, Melissa. Like, go out and play and be like the other kids. And I remember even as a toddler thinking don't they realize I want to go out and play and be carefree? Like, I can't. Like, I'm feeling this despair that's like raging through me and nobody seems to care. So I morphed myself into a person that would be acceptable by societal standards, and that involved 3 P's. It involved pleasing, which I became the ultimate pleaser, like putting myself not even on the list and becoming a martyr, serving to the extent that everyone needed me and loved how I supported them, but never asking for anything in return, which leads you to martyrdom, which is like a deep undercurrent of resentment. I became a perfectionist who felt like I had to be perfect in everything, my performance, my behavior, my looks, and anything short of exemplary was a failure. And that leads to an utter breakdown because perfectionism is inhuman and we are imperfect as humans. And then performance. I became like the ultimate actress who could put on a show and sort of convince people that I was like happy-go-lucky and carefree, when inside I was very, very much the opposite. Yeah. So, that I was able to put on that facade through my 20s and 30s. And that was who I was. I didn't even realize I was putting on a facade. That became my persona. But in my 40s, right around like 2018, probably, I started feeling that cry of my authentic soul to be seen. And it started, I kept saying, shut up, soul. Like you're gonna stay down there. And it wouldn't listen, it wouldn't listen to me. It kept saying, like I need to become authentic and I need to express my truth. And it got so loud that I ultimately went on a podcast, expressed this. I started to have these revelations that I suffered from something called existential depression, which is a crisis of meaning, which you can talk about. And I bared my soul, and that led to the beginning of Lifelines, because Lifelines is my memoir that I wrote after I did the podcast and received really hundreds of the most powerful, soulful letters I'd ever gotten in my life of people saying, oh my gosh, you gave voice to something I've experienced my whole life and have never had the courage to share. So I thought if I could show people they're not alone and let them see that someone who on the face of it looks like she has everything, is still struggling every single day, even today, maybe I can help them to find their light in the midst of a lot of darkness.
Well, I applaud you over and over and over again. I think, number one, when you and I first met, Melissa, one of the connections I made is, wow, this is such an authentic person. And I know you've done a lot of work in your own journey to get there. You talked about sort of the mask that you wear or wore in the past. And, I think that Lifelines, as well as many other things that are out there for young people, is so important for individuals to recognize that, we can do two things in life. We can pretend all the time, or we can become our authentic self. And I think that, when a person works at, and a lot of times goes through therapy to get to that place, it is extremely powerful. So I applaud you for being as open as you are about your own journey, and certainly appreciate all of that. Absolutely.
I mean, I have no choice now, and I'm so glad I did it. It's so, you don't realize how exhausting it is to live a lie. And I think people I speak with who are in a state of despair, they always use the same word, which is exhausted. And it's exhausting because you're putting on a show to hide your truth. So you have to like keep yourself, buoyant, which saps all your energy.
Oh my God.
So.
Absolutely. And so, a bit about what I do, and with You Are Heard, I'm constantly, and my staff are constantly working with young adults. I guess that's a good segue into talking about wellness, because to me, one of my big motivators when I first started 12 years ago was looking at the statistic of how many young adults don't get help. And I was shocked at this huge gap, and then started to look into why. And you'd come up with things like the stigma, which makes sense. A person's stigma and the community stigma. You'd look at access to care and all of the things that probably pardon me, don't surprise you. But then you look at the concept of it's easier to just keep moving on, or at least people say it is. And so I know over the years thousands of kids that have taken a step, whether it's an email or a phone call or gone to a counseling center, and they haven't had a good experience. So what do? They do nothing, and they keep trudging. And so we're looking at, as parents, as providers, as adults in the community, we're looking at just this huge population of young adults that need services and aren't getting them. And so again, I come back to your ability to just be so authentic. I think it's a role model on many levels for people to say, look, we're all human beings. We are all susceptible. I tell people all the time. I've been to therapy myself several times. I've done my own work. And, I think the second we get to a place where, oh, not me, we're wrong. We're missing something, right? So we're all susceptible. So moving into that topic, I guess I'm curious to ask you, I mean, we're living in a really complicated time, as you know, and the suicide rate for young people has gone up tremendously. Statistically, 10 years ago, it was number 12. It's now number 2 in terms of leading cause of death for young people. Anxiety and depression, as you know, since COVID has exponentially gone up. And I guess I'm curious to ask you, when you think about the biggest stressors that you notice for young adults, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so this is directly related to Lifelines, actually, because our inaugural partner is Barnes and Noble College.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
we're part of their Be Well Be You initiative, which is exactly about well-being and tools for well-being. And they shared a whole bunch of stats with us from inside higher ed. They did a lot of surveys, and actually 83% of students are saying that stress is negatively impacting their college experience.
Yeah.
And according to that survey, they say that pressure to perform is actually number 1.
Yeah.
Now, I've
Yeah.
seen other stats that talk about money and other things, but the pressure to perform is really a scary one.
Yeah.
Because it's like, when did learning become secondary to performance? It's like so insane.
Yeah.
That they're so worried about grades that they can't even enjoy like learning about new things. It's really
I know.
sad.
I know. I mean, it's somewhat rhetorical, I know when you said it, but I'll answer you by saying, when I look at middle school and high school kids, it starts way back then, where there's this concept of, if I'm not taking 5 million AP classes, and if I'm not, I mean, when you and I were in school, straight A's was a 4.0. That's like average now, right? It's like, I got to get a 4.6. I got to get a,
Yep. Yep.
weighted, unweighted. I mean, there's all this terminology, and it's like, to me, I think we live in a bit of a world where good is not good enough, you know?
It's so true. We've gotten so caught up in the extrinsic, right? That the intrinsic, the things we do for joy in meeting, are completely lost. I remember I have 6 children, so I have had the children experience. We had a bunch of 6th graders over, and I remember they were like sitting in a circle, and they were talking about the pressure they felt to get into college
Sixth grade.
in
Sixth
sixth
grade.
grade.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh my gosh, are you guys really feeling that? And they were like, yes, we're so terrified. They're like, first you got to get in the honors classes. Then you got to, like, they already had the path, and it looked more and more terrifying to them in 6th grade. And I just thought, if they're feeling that now, like, basically they're becoming, and in Melissa and Doug, I talked a lot about play and
Yeah,
how
of course.
play became, really something that parents didn't believe in because it wasn't a skill that you could put on a resume. And this idea of like making these children adults, right? When they're now, little kids, we're professionalizing everything they do and making it into these rote scheduled activities. We're basically taking the joy out of life. So by the time they get to college, they're burned out, they're exhausted, and a lot of them are depressed because they don't even know who they are and what they want to do with their lives, and they have no passion for anything.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that, because I mean, I often thought in my town when I was younger in 6th grade, we went up to junior high school and then recess was gone.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, people would say, how's school? How's junior high school? And I'm like, you know what? It kind of stinks, because I really miss recess. Like,
Yeah, of
that
course.
was like my favorite time of the day. And I think, back then you'd ask kids, and that's what they'd say. They'd say recess, they'd say gym, they'd say, lunch. And nowadays it just kind of gets absorbed. I've met kids in junior high school, 7th and 8th grade, where they're not taking lunch. They're taking a class. They're
Exactly.
working through class,
Yes.
and it's like, so the concept of, I like how you said that, and I think it's very, very accurate. We're taking away the fun. And so to me, I work really hard as a therapist when I'm talking to kids to say, hey, look, We do four things. There's four, to me, there's a formula I developed when it comes to college. Four things that all kids need to do in order to succeed and have a smile on their face. And it's funny, Melissa, two of the four things are social.
Yeah.
So when I talk to parents about that, they're sort of aghast. Like, I've got academic in there, that's one, right? But I want kids to have fun. I want kids, as human beings, we need to find a way to let the steam out, right? And enjoy ourselves. Otherwise, we absolutely become anxious, depressed, or both.
Yeah,
Uh,
one of the most profound things I've read recently is the Surgeon General's report on loneliness. You know, he came out a few months ago and said that loneliness is an epidemic. And if
mhm.
you read his report, I suggest everybody read it. It is so mind blowing. The group that is the loneliest is 18 to 24-year olds
Wow. Wow.
in the throes of college. And it's because, again, if, I think there's a whole process, and I've written a practice for myself called Practice Makes Purpose, which really talks about you can't even make those authentic connections until you begin to discover who you are. And I think one of the problems with college students is, even though they're among, thousands and thousands of peers, because most of them have never had a childhood and they've been resume building their whole lives, they've never actually done that inward journey to discover who they are, what they love, what their passions are. So their friendships, their connections are also inauthentic,
Right.
and aren't filling them up in the way that true connections are. So they may not be alone, but they're still lonely in the midst of having all these superficial, inauthentic connections.
It's a great point, and that's the exact word, superficial. So they may have people around them, but they're not actual friends, deep friendships, right, with those connections. It's a really, really good point. I see that all the time with kids. And it's funny, for the high school kids transitioning into college, all they want is to have that group around them. In some ways, kids don't necessarily even care if they're deep connected, friendships. They just want those people around them. So they're not feeling that loneliness. But that's a fascinating comment about loneliness and this age bracket. So let me ask you this, as a mom of six, what can we do as parents? What can we do to assist our kid? Big question, but to assist our kids' mental wellness. What do you think?
It's the hardest thing to do ever, but Jung said it many, many years ago. He said the biggest threat to children are their parents' unrealized dreams. And I think the best thing we can do is allow our children to be who they truly, authentically are, and try really hard not to pressure them to be something that they can't or don't want to be. And I think when you allow your kids to flourish, and I'm not saying you give them general guidance, right? You don't let them do whatever they want.
Sure.
But you let them follow their passions. You don't push them into hockey because you were a hockey player who didn't get their due. You don't force them to play year-round sports if they don't want to. That's really hard for parents. And it was hard for me. I learned by screwing it up a lot of times. And finally, that's why I joke we had to have 6 children, because we messed up so many times that we needed to keep having more to fix the problems.
That's how we learn. That's how we learn.
Yeah, but the last 2, I think I've really become much, much better at allowing them to be who they are. And it's given me such joy. So they're not traditional learners. They don't go to the high pressured, school. But they've found their people. They've found a place where they belong. And it makes me feel so gratified to know that I got my ego out of it and sort of allowed them to do what they wanted to do.
Really, really well said. I mean, I feel like I say this all the time, because I watch staff members in high school. I watch families throughout middle and high school. I watch them helping their kids tour schools, helping their kids pick schools.
Doing
But
their work for them.
doing their work for them. But
I mean, come on. How many parents are doing their
oh,
kids' papers for them? A
a
lot.
lot. But very rarely do they ask the basic question, are you happy? Because the answer is for most kids that they'll say probably not, you know.
Well, because
And
the parents, it goes deeper.
excuse me.
The parents aren't happy.
Right.
So, like, as much as I went into parenthood saying, "Oh my gosh, I want the best for my kids. I want them to be who they are," I had so many expectations. I'm actually shocked when I thought about it and I saw the way I was, pushing my kids in ways that I wanted them to be to validate my ego. It was horrifying. And, I had an experience with my very first one where I pushed him. I was a classical guitarist who thought about playing professionally and ended up giving it up to go to, college. And I was pushing my son to play classical guitar, not realizing it, right? Totally unconsciously. And one day I noticed he wasn't practicing at all. Like, really felt like I'd take him to his lessons and he'd be hanging his head. And one day he came up to me and said, "Mom, I have to tell you something." And I was like, "What, sweetie?" He looked so depressed and he started crying. And he said, "I'm a baseball player, not a guitar player." And I didn't even hear it the first time. I was like, "What did you say?" He said, "I'm a baseball player, not a guitar player." And my heart broke. I was literally like, oh my gosh, me. Like, I'm the play advocate. And I messed up my kid. I actually pushed him to do something that he hated. And we ended it that day. And he did love baseball. But baseball, by the way, also became professionalized. And by the time he thought about playing in college, he was so burnt out over making it a job that the same thing happened. So, we mess up our kids, and it's inadvertent. We love them. We're trying to do our best, but it really messes with their head when they're trying to live out our dreams.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I take so many things from that, but one of which is we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah,
We're going to make mistakes, and
definitely.
And important for us to learn from them.
Yeah.
And I also think that really important for us to listen to our kids, because a lot of times our kids will give suggestions. They may say it once, and like you said, I didn't hear it the first time, but really important to listen to our kids, because they're going to talk a little bit about what their passions are, and their passions may be very different from ours, and that's okay.
Yes, exactly.
That's okay.
And the funny thing is, we want this homogeneity, but the truth is, the more weird and different they are, the more exciting it will be. My kids that have had the strangest passions are the ones who are, I'd say, the most authentically themselves and have done the coolest things in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're interesting, right? Because it's something that maybe we don't know about.
And also, if you understand creativity, it's about collecting ingredients in very diverse domains and ultimately mixing them into a recipe that becomes this secret sauce.
Right.
So you think oh, my kid's interested in that. What good is that going to serve them in life? Well, actually, it's integral to them being a truly innovative, creative person. And I think, unfortunately, right, you go into parenthood with no skill, zero training.
Right.
We have to do more to adopt a pet than have a kid.
That's true.
And I mean, trust me, we've adopted a lot of pets. They put us the ringer there. What's your house going to be like? What are you going to? But kids, you don't do anything, and then you're a flawed person. I mean, I'm speaking of myself. I'm a flawed person.
We all
are.
So
of course I'm gonna, make all these mistakes with my kids. But if I had known some of these things, I'm sure I would have been better served.
Well, look, I think life is a journey, and it is part of our process to learn from all those things, and so I think if you think about it, way back when we learned math and spelling and handwriting and all those fun things, I mean, the only way you learn is by making mistakes. So,
trial and error.
Why would parenting be any different, right? So, but I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, wellness is a topic that I'm around all the time, and I talk to students about all the time, and it's one that I find the treadmill of life that you were talking about before, of kids are just sort of in this routine. They're doing everything they can to get the best grades they can get, to open up the best opportunities they can get, but they're not really thinking about their wellness. They're not getting enough rest. They're not eating well. They're
Right.
not hydrating. They're not seeing a counselor when they need to. They're not exercising. I mean, they're not doing kind of the basics. And I know Lifeline's sort of one of the philosophies behind what you guys do is wellness. I guess I'm curious, when you think about young people and sort of the easy things that some of them may be able to do that maybe they're not, what comes to
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, for myself in my journey, I realized that I can't just wing this, right? I'm too much at risk at going really low
Yep.
or going really high and not coming back like to earth.
Mm-hmm.
So I created a framework for myself that's in the form of a practice called Practice Makes Purpose.
I
And
love that.
that's what I'm talking about when I go to speak to college students now. It's basically 4 branches in the metaphor of a tree that really help nurture your physical well-being, right? It's self-care, it's your mental well-being through grounding, detaching from thought and coming back to the present moment. It's emotional well-being through connecting to yourself first. And
Mm-hmm.
then only once you have connected and can love yourself can you connect to that greater group. We call it our grove because it's trees. And then the last piece is our spiritual well-being, which is a combination of 2 wings of a bird. One is play and one is purpose. And to soar like a bird, you have to have pretty equal measures of play, which leads to joy, and purpose, which leads to meaning. So it's really through being able to like satiate your physical needs, being able to get out of the past and the future and come home to the present moment, being able to understand who am I, what are my unique gifts I want to share with the world, then connect to like people who want to be your tribe in that, and then ultimately how do I take that gift I have, transcend myself to engage in purpose, but also how do I measure that with ample amount of play that brings my life joy and doesn't give me empathy fatigue from too much purpose.
I love that. What a great framework. Wonderful. And really captures a little bit of everything, as I'm listening to it. I'm noticing not once did you say cell phones or social media, right? Which is good. Um, but number 2, I'm thinking the word balance, comes through as you're talking about all these things and trying to strike that balance. So often do I see young people playing too much, or not playing enough. I definitely know students that are in the library way too much, 8, 9 hours a day. And
I
it's
think that's why when they're in high school, like when you're seeing them before they go to college, this is what happened to me because I had a complete breakdown in college. And so have a few of my kids. And the reason is because they go to college without any like practice at
right,
all.
right.
And then it's becoming all about social and academic. And if one or both of those fails, then they'll fall into an abyss of, nothingness.
Yeah,
Um, so I think you really, because you don't know, it's hard if you don't actually schedule it, right? And create a
I agree.
daily deliberate practice. It usually doesn't happen. And then you
I,
wonder why you're falling so low. Well, it's like, well, because I'm not sleeping, as you said,
right.
I'm eating horribly. I'm not doing anything that's really bringing me joy. Everything is extrinsic, and you can start to see.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And for those parents that are on today, I want to make the point, added on to that, Melissa. There are some basic things in high school before they get to college they can begin to do, because these are all things, whether it's self-care, eating, sleeping, exercise, whether it's journaling, whether it's learning about nutrition, whether it's organization, checking your email each day, having a good system going into college. As to, I love how you said scheduling time, whether it be time, to get productive things done, but even scheduling time to have fun. I know know that sounds weird, but like, scheduling time and making, 'cause that way, it won't go anywhere, right? It's
No.
there.
I even
Um,
tell them, my kids, because they get very panicked about all the stuff they have to do.
yep,
I'm always saying, break it into bite-sized chunks and
absolutely.
reward yourself. Reward yourself. Say, if I finish this first 2 pages of my paper, I can go for a walk. I can even watch a show that I like. Like, make it, a reward system
Yep.
which doesn't make it overwhelming and allows you to give yourself the breaks that that you desperately want.
And motivates you. I mean, let's face
And
it, kids need that. And, I like what you said earlier. I mean, the commentary around the Surgeon General's thoughts around loneliness. College, the stakes are really high, and I don't think parents recognize that going in. It's like there's tuition, there's grades, there's everything's new, and I think kids that I work with, when, as you said, when they fail something, their first thought is my life is over.
that's what
And
my
my
thought
my
was.
yeah, yeah. And my first thought is, nope, it's just beginning. Like this is an
Yep.
opportunity. But nobody has ever said that to them because it's just push, 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 push.
Yeah,
So,
and what they've done to get into college, they're already exhausted.
oh yeah,
Like, they basically pulled out all the stops. They've killed, like, prostrated themselves to get to this space, and now it's only just beginning. The competition, because now everybody's at that level, and everybody's like, suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, I have 4 more years of this. Like, it
yeah.
can be really overwhelming
Oh
to
my
some
God.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I had a very similar story. My son, who's now a junior in college, when he was in sixth grade, he took a math class that he qualified for, and it was a seventh grade math class. And so I find myself sitting in this presentation, sixth grade. The parents are all in sixth grade. Kids are, I'm not sure how old they are, 11 maybe. And all of a sudden, the presentation, which was a PowerPoint, shifts into AP, honors, like their
The
life. Like
track, the
I felt like,
the
yeah.
track.
And I'm like, we're
Yeah.
still talking about 11-year-olds, right? Like, what's going on? And I went up to the presenter afterwards, and I said to him, like, I'm a little blown away. Like, this is, but I think that's an indicator of that happens in a lot of towns. And there's a track that gets set up. And until the parent says, hey, I don't want my kids playing 6 sports every season, or doing every activity under the sun. I literally met a kid last year who told me he had done every activity offered at his high school. Every activity offered. Like, how is there even time for that?
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
and that's the other thing that I tell so many kids. They miss the point. Colleges, actually, they don't want that. They want
Right.
you to show that you are passionate about something and can get really, really into it. And they much rather see that than act like you're just trying a little of everything, because that shows that you have no passion and
Right.
you're just dabbling. So I think it's much more important. I think if we stopped thinking about the goal and lived in the verb, right? We're living in the noun, like what college you're in, as opposed to realizing that the journey is the path, right? In Buddhism, the journey is supposed to be the path. Well, this journey is awful. Like, everybody's suffering so much to get to something that just allows more, is going to spark more suffering. So I
It's
think, yeah, but it's up
it's
to
a
us
great
as
point.
parents to say to them, we have to say to them, listen, I get that you're in a system that, is valuing this. And hey, some would say, when you have children, a lot of play experts, Peter Gray, one of my favorites, says before you have children, you should really think about the community you want to raise them in and what their
Good
values
point.
are.
Good point.
And
Yeah.
that alone, right? Because as my daughter said to me many times, in the community we're in, Mom, we can't not care about. Every time I said, don't worry about your grades, they don't matter. One of my daughters said, we have like 3 streaming apps of GPA at our high school. Like, literally, it's telling you your rank every test you upload. Like, I can't not care. This is the town I'm in, which horrified me.
Yeah.
But like, those decisions, if you want to make them, you can make them earlier on, and visit your schools and see what messages they're giving, and sort of choose a different path. Because it is hard if you're in a community that's the path every single kid is on. yes, you could be like, it doesn't matter, I'm fine with whatever you do, but it's harder.
It's a great point. It's a great point. And you know, as graphic as this commentary is, I can't tell you how many, you know, kids that are number one in their class over the years that I've hospitalized. You know, for severe eating disorders, severe depression, severe anxiety. You know, and so I think your
I
point
was
about,
there. I was
yeah,
one of those kids. I
yeah.
mean, and I was a complete and utter mess. You know, had a horrible eating disorder because you know that stuff. It just makes you feel like the bar keeps getting higher and you can never reach it.
Yeah. So looking at, you know, ways in which parents can help kids enjoy life, have fun, put a smile on their face, not be so intense, maybe take a break from the treadmill that school creates. I think all of those things are important. And a lot of it's done through role modeling, you know.
I was
So when
going to
you
say
say
the
that,
exact thing.
yeah,
If we are showing ourselves to be really uptight, intense, and worried all the time, then what are we showing them, right? So I think we do have to model that it's okay to mess up. And one thing my husband has done really, really well, not one of many things, but one thing he's done especially well is he was a horrible student. And he always shared stories, and his mother would get so angry because they lived with us for a while, because he would always share when he failed stuff and got C's, and he's been so successful.
hmm,
But I always love those stories because, you know, he was showing them like, it's okay. You could,
right.
you know, and he went to a very average, you know, state university, and like he's done anything he ever dreamed of, and having gone to a different school wouldn't have changed that at all.
Right.
So I always loved the fact that he kind of was that voice of reason, like, look at me, I did fine.
Really good example. And I think, you know, again, sometimes, you know, families and kids will merge the concept of success and happiness. And, you know, I think and kids will see, I have to go to a certain school, I have to get a certain GPA, I have to do this, I have to do that. And then I have to say to them, that's just school. Like, that's just your education. That's not life. That's not success. That is just school. Your life, your occupational path actually starts after that, you know? And a lot of that comes down to hard work. A lot of that comes down to passion. You know, how passionate are you? So your point, Melissa, from earlier, I think is a great one. You know, if you know students are finding, or families are finding that their passion is going down and down and down as they're taxed and stressed through college, that's not helpful. Because then they hit the working world with no, you know, no energy toward what they really want to do. So I think
There's
important
this,
for families to put some energy into that.
yeah, I was going to say there's this amazing graph in meaning,
Hmm.
logotherapy, which is healing through meaning, which has two axes. One is happiness and despair, and the other is success and failure. And it shows that they're separate, completely separate axes. And actually, success doesn't, it's all about how you perceive it, right? Because many of the most successful people, the number one in their classes, are absolutely, utterly miserable.
Right.
And many people who've experienced failures, you know, learn from them, and they're the biggest gifts ever. So really, if you're thinking that they're on the same plane, they're not.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to realize that, because it sort of frames that when we say like we're trying to strive for success, it means that we might get there and we won't be happy at all.
Right. I can't tell you how many examples I've seen of that in my career. You know, 25 years. I've seen so many adults that, you know, are surprised by that. So they're
Yep.
successful, but they're so unhappy.
Yep.
You know, and so I think for families nowadays, it's important to acknowledge and to recognize, look, we're living in a bit of a different world right now. Not only is success, you know, as you were saying, in a lot of communities, sort of top of the list. There's a competition. we're also living in a world where, mental wellness isn't great. We haven't rebounded since COVID the way I don't think anyone's really wanted to. So just really important, I think, for families to be thinking about that. I think, as a therapist, I'm biased, but I think for kids, if they're sparking symptoms and having difficulty, letting them know, hey, there's not only is there help out there, there's help that looks differently than it used to, right? So it used to be, I'm going to go and I'm going to speak to a 110-year-old, person with a huge long beard, right? I'm being a little extreme, but you know what I mean? I think that the way in which help looks nowadays, it is different. And, giving young people that ability to say, hey, it exists. You just have to sort of decide if that's something you want. And I think in so many instances, Lifelines being a really great example of this, help doesn't necessarily mean sitting down with a counselor in an office to talk through things. A lot of help is really, acknowledging that there's a journey that needs to occur. And, you're sort of deciding not to right now, but it doesn't mean that you can't.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's really about that the tools are there. I think a lot of times kids aren't ready or they don't think they want it, which you can't. I believe you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, having been a parent for so many years. But I think having them know that these are the tools and they're right here when you need them is like one of the most important things we can do as parents, and not
So
stigmatize
important.
them. Saying
So
like,
important.
hey, I went to therapy, like here's some tools, this is a great place to go if you need it. And please, let me know if you need something. Don't suffer in silence.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just looking at the time, Melissa, and we had talked about, seeing each other for 20 minutes today. I feel like I could talk to you forever on this topic. So I want to thank you for your time and just acknowledge that, you took some time out of your day today. I really, really appreciate it. And for those that are out there that have interest, please educate yourself and look up Lifelines, because it's really an amazing program out there that Melissa's working really hard at developing. So thank you so much.
Well, what you're doing at You Are Heard is so amazing. From the time I met you, I knew Marc is going to change the world, and one person at a time, and that's the best way to do it. So please, my dogs agree. So please support him as well.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We'll talk to you soon. Be well.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.